I dropped my keys on the small table by the door and felt a familiar heaviness in my shoulders. It had been a long day at the marketing agency, full of client calls that tested my patience. The bustle and noise still rattled around in my mind, and all I wanted was silence. But it wasn't a dreary, sad kind of silence I sought. It was the comforting hush of my bedroom, that private space where an entirely different part of me existed. I shrugged off my suit jacket and lingered in the hallway, glancing around as though someone might be watching. Even though I lived alone, I always had this subtle urge to check my surroundings, like I was holding a secret that hummed just beneath the surface. No one else was home, of course, so I locked the door. The lamp in the living room glowed softly, revealing the worn furniture I'd picked up when I moved into this apartment. It was a modest place, no bigger than a one-bedroom with a small kitchen attached. Most of my friends teased me about it, said a marketing specialist could afford something bigger. But for me, this was all I needed. Enough room to be James, and within these walls, enough privacy to be Jessica too. The moment the door was locked, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That was always the first sign. A distinct wave of relief swept over me. Even though the day had been tense, I knew the routine that came next. It was almost a well-rehearsed dance by now. I kicked off my shoes, letting them clatter haphazardly on the floor, and drifted toward my bedroom. The bedroom itself was rather bland. A queen-size bed, a simple wooden dresser, a mirror leaning against the wall because I'd never bothered mounting it. What wasn't obvious to the casual eye were the storage boxes stacked neatly beneath my bed. I'd labeled them with discreet stickers so I could tell them apart. One for dresses, one for blouses, one for skirts, one for shoes, and one for assorted items, accessories, jewelry, and a few purses. It might sound extravagant, but it was an organized system I'd developed over the years. I stepped inside, closed the door, and flipped the lock out of habit. Even though I lived by myself, locking the door felt like a symbolic gesture. Once I turned that lock, James's responsibilities stayed on the other side. The day's tension hovered around me. All the demands of meetings and phone calls, the pressure to impress clients, the unspoken competition with my coworkers. Now, I could shed all of that like a heavy coat. I pressed my forehead to the wooden door for a moment, breathing deeply. Then I turned, crouched down, and pulled out the first of the storage boxes. My heart gave a small flutter, the way it always did when I prepared for this transition. Some might think it was guilt making my heart race, but that wasn't it at all. It was anticipation. A sense of excitement, maybe even liberation, hovered at the edges of my chest. As I lifted the lid off the box labeled dresses, I flicked on the small speaker on my dresser. The music that poured forth was the kind I'd never admit to listening to at work, soft pop tunes with catchy choruses that always made me feel lighter. It wasn't that I despised the music James liked, but there was something about these tunes, about Jessica's playlist, that freed me from my usual guarded self. I pulled out a sundress, sky blue with small white polka dots. The fabric felt light against my fingers, almost whispery when it moved. I'd found it in a vintage shop last year. It had caught my eye instantly, and I'd been so nervous bringing it up to the cashier, worried what they might think. But the clerk hadn't even blinked. They'd simply folded it, placed it in a brown paper bag, and handed it over. I remembered leaving the store that day with a thrill coursing through me, already imagining the quiet joy I'd feel when I could finally slip it on at home. Alone in that bedroom, I set the dress aside and opened my closet. Within it hung my day-to-day clothes, dress shirts, slacks, the occasional jacket. But behind them were a few items I kept on hangers for easy access. A knee-length black skirt, a couple of sweaters I wore only when Jessica emerged in cooler weather. It was still warm enough that I could get away with the sundress. Sometimes I liked to go all out with the outfit. Other times, I kept it simple, Tonight, I wanted the simplest option possible. The day had been exhausting, and I craved something comfortable that made me feel graceful and at peace. I found the pale stockings I usually paired with the sundress. No guilt tugged at me, only a hushed eagerness. Even the slightest rustle of the dress or stockings heightened that feeling. Then I retrieved a pair of small wedge sandals from the shoebox. They were a neutral color, something that I thought went with everything. When I bought them, I'd convinced myself they were practical. Not that wearing them outside was really an option, but it made me smile to see how well they matched certain outfits. Slipping out of my work clothes was the next step, like shedding one identity for another. I was left standing in front of the mirror in my boxers. I paused to look at myself. James, mid-20s, an average build that I kept decently in shape because my doctor told me to exercise regularly. My hair was short, well styled for the office, but I kept it trimmed with a bit of length at the top. Somewhere behind my eyes, I recognized the stress from the day. There were faint lines of tension in my forehead. I looked tired. Then I eased into the dress and felt the gentle glide of the fabric along my torso, the subtle flare at the waist. It was like stepping into a role that let me breathe. I pulled the straps over my shoulders and adjusted them until the dress fit just right. Next came the stockings, which I rolled up my legs with slow, careful movements, then the sandals with their tiny buckle straps. I had to fiddle with one of them to get it to clasp. And there I was, standing in the mirror, no longer James in the typical sense, but not an entirely different person either. The best way I could describe it was that I felt like an updated version of myself, a part of me that was lighter and more carefree. I reached into another box and pulled out a wig, soft brown waves that reached my shoulders. I carefully placed it on my head, shifting it until I found the perfect angle that framed my face. Then I bent my head from side to side, checking if it looked natural. It never ceased to amaze me how this simple transformation worked wonders for my mind. The reflection that met my gaze now had a gentleness to it. Sure, if someone looked too closely, they'd see the lines of a man's face under the makeup I applied. But I wasn't trying to fool anyone. I wasn't aiming to become a different person entirely. I just wanted a place where my burdens evaporated, replaced by something bright and calm. I dug out a small makeup kit and took my time with light foundation, a hint of blush, and a delicate nude lipstick. It wasn't about perfection. I'd never been a professional with brushes and palettes, but I liked the ritual. As each layer went on, I watched James's tension dissolve further, giving way to a softer presence. The entire act was a gentle unraveling of everything that weighed me down outside. Finally, I stepped back and looked at myself. "Hey, Jessica," I murmured with a smile. The name had first come to me in college, when I was still testing the waters of crossdressing. I remembered reading a magazine article featuring someone named Jessica, and I'd thought the name sounded so bright and inviting. Something about it felt like me during those moments. Over time, it stuck. Whenever I wanted to slip into that relaxing space, I called myself Jessica in my head. It was almost like a vacation from the weight of being James. A soft pop song played from my speaker, a cheerful melody that sounded like sunshine. I found myself swaying to it. It was gentle, that unself-conscious groove. There was no guilt, no sense of wrongdoing. It was a simple embrace of what felt freeing. James had deadlines and phone calls and rent to pay. Jessica just needed to exist here, in this small bedroom, letting each chord of the music brush away the day's fatigue. I clicked off the main overhead light, leaving only a lamp on, which cast a warm glow in the corner. Then I stepped forward and stood in front of the mirror again. I checked the drape of the sundress, the way it whispered around my thighs if I shifted my weight. Not too revealing, not too tight, just enough to feel pretty. I gave a small twirl, giggling softly at how the skirt fluttered. It was nice not worrying if the dress was too flashy for a business meeting, or if the color was too bright for conservative clients. My phone buzzed on the dresser. With a small sigh, I picked it up. Of course, I thought. James's responsibilities sneaking back in. It was my boss, Lucas, sending an evening email with next week's schedule. Lucas was decent enough, always polite, but the agency had been in a crunch for months now, and we were all feeling the strain. That sense of pressure never let up. Clients demanded ad campaigns that needed to go live yesterday. Social media updates had to be instantaneous, and analytics had to be thorough. I scrolled through the email quickly. More deadlines, more tasks, more appointments. I set the phone aside. Jessica didn't need to deal with that right now. I turned the music up a little louder, pacing around the small confines of my bedroom in a slow circle. I paused to adjust the wig in the mirror again. A single lamp lit the space around me, giving the room a soft, intimate feel. Outside, the city bustled, the usual hum of traffic drifting in through the window. Part of me toyed with the idea of stepping onto the small balcony, just for a moment, to feel the nighttime breeze on my shoulders. But I decided against it. Even though I wasn't ashamed, I was cautious about letting neighbors see me in a way that might invite gossip or drama. This was my safe haven, and I wanted it to stay that way. Now, fully Jessica, I hopped onto my bed, careful to smooth my dress beneath me, and let my legs dangle off the edge. It was such a strange contrast sometimes, seeing the graceful swish of a sundress where I'd normally see my typical button-down shirt or t-shirt. But no sense of wrongness accompanied that realization. Instead, it was like gazing at a soft painting, something quiet and reassuring. The tension in my back melted away, and my breathing slowed as if I'd settled into a warm bath. My friend Joel had once insisted I must feel guilty. He didn't know the full story about me, but we'd shared a few beers at a local bar, and a random conversation about crossdressing had come up. Joel was the type who tried to be supportive in his own laid-back way, but he admitted he didn't quite understand. When we left the bar that evening, he'd patted me on the shoulder and said, "I guess for some folks, it's a guilty pleasure." I remembered biting my tongue, resisting the urge to say more. Joel wasn't a bad person, but he didn't get it. Right now, sprawled across my bed as Jessica, I thought of that moment. A guilty pleasure. Strange words to me, because I felt no guilt. The only thing that tingled in the back of my mind was how much I'd missed this sensation during the week. Maybe that was the only pang. I missed Jessica more often than I admitted. Missing her wasn't a source of shame, though. It was a reminder of how calm I felt in these clothes, in this persona I'd cultivated over time. The track changed to a melodic, slower tune. My eyelids fluttered, my mind drifting across old memories. I was well into adulthood now, but I recalled the first time I'd tried on my mother's sweater as a teenager. I was taller than her by then, so it didn't fit exactly right, and I had to take it off before anyone noticed. But the moment I pulled it over my shoulders, my heart had hammered with a combination of fear and curious elation. In that instant, something had clicked. Yet it took me years to get the courage to explore it for myself. Even in college, living away from home, I rarely told anyone. It was personal, and I liked keeping it that way. I never saw it as a way to be someone else completely. I just knew that sometimes, stepping out of my usual routine and into Jessica's dresses and wigs offered a weightless kind of peace. No frantic mental chatter telling me to be more assertive at work, to network better, to climb the corporate ladder faster. Jessica didn't care about corporate politics. She just liked the color of the sky blue dress, the gentle slope of wedge sandals, the warm glow of a lamp reflecting in the mirror. Maybe James suppressed parts of himself out of habit, out of the necessity to function in a busy professional world. Jessica brought those subdued parts to the surface. Lost in these thoughts, I almost forgot I had my phone on the dresser. When it buzzed again, I sighed and glanced at the screen. Another coworker, Shannon, was sending me a final note about a presentation we were both working on. We had to pitch an idea next Wednesday, some big rebranding campaign for a real estate client. I typed a quick reply, promising to check the revised slides tomorrow morning. Then I silenced my phone. Enough of that, I thought. Standing again, I let the music flow around me and started to hum with it. The tension around my temples eased more with each passing second. The swirl of the skirt around my legs felt playful, and I turned to the mirror again just to see that slight grin on my face. Without overthinking it, I began to talk to my reflection in a casual way, as though Jessica were a friend. It wasn't a conversation full of self-doubt or worry. It was playful. "How was your day?" I asked the reflection, adopting a gentle tone. My reflection didn't answer, but I giggled anyway. Then I replied softly, "It was busy, but better now." That was enough. The simple game was a reminder that I was free here, free to act however I wanted for an hour or two. Some people might find that odd, but it gave me joy. It was a private little theater performance, a dance of personality. James rarely indulged in such whimsical behavior, but Jessica found it soothing. Time slipped by in that bedroom. The small lamp's light pooled around me, and the music drifted between upbeat tunes and slower ballads. After a while, my stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten much for dinner. Taking a cautious peek out into the hallway, an entirely needless act, but a reflex, I decided I wanted to continue staying in Jessica's attire while I made myself something to eat. I walked into the kitchen, the wedges tapping lightly on the floor. Even that small sound felt liberating, like each step was a release from the world outside. I opened the fridge and rummaged around. I settled on leftover pasta from the previous day and popped it into the microwave. As I waited for it to heat, I leaned against the counter. My reflection in the black surface of the microwave door revealed a silhouette of a womanly figure thanks to the dress, but I knew exactly who was underneath. It made me smile. I tapped my fingers along the countertop to the beat of the music, drifting from the bedroom. My mind was blissfully blank. No swirling of tasks, no avalanche of worry. That was the real gift Jessica offered me. When the microwave beeped, I carefully removed the bowl, grabbed a fork, and took a seat at the small kitchen table. I took a bite of the reheated pasta, enjoying the flavor and the hum of the city outside my window. Then came a knock at the door. My heart jumped, and a flutter of alarm crossed my face. Nobody ever dropped by unannounced, at least not often. I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. The knock came again, louder this time. There wasn't any reason for me to panic. I lived in a modestly secure building, and it could simply be a neighbor in need of something. But an unexpected visitor when I was fully dressed as Jessica unnerved me. Quickly, I set down my fork, brushed a stray curl of the wig off my forehead, and tiptoed to the door. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice neutral. "James? It's Joel," came the muffled reply. My friend's voice was tinged with confusion, as if he wasn't sure he had the right apartment. "Your car's in the lot. You okay?" Joel. We'd known each other since college, and even though we weren't the closest pals, we hung out occasionally for drinks. Lately, he'd been sending me messages about some gaming convention he wanted me to attend. While I valued his friendship, I hadn't told him about Jessica. The idea of opening the door right now filled me with a slight wave of dread. I remained silent, hoping maybe he'd give up and leave. But he knocked again. "James?" Joel repeated. I ran back to my room as softly as I could, nearly tripping over my sandals. Shoving the bedroom door shut behind me, I flicked on the overhead light and hurried to the mirror. My wig was definitely staying. Taking it off quickly was possible, but then my hair would be flattened underneath, and I'd have to toss the wig somewhere. If I answered the door in a t-shirt, it might raise fewer questions than if I answered in a wig and sundress. But was there time to change entirely? My heart pounded in my chest. This was a scenario I'd carefully avoided for years. Someone I knew seeing me like this. "James?" Joel called once more, voice sharper this time. I flicked my gaze around. I could toss on a robe or an oversized sweater. Maybe I could hide the dress, skip the shoes, remove the wig, and pretend I was just in pajamas. I yanked open my closet door, grabbed a large sweater, and pulled it on over the dress. The hem still peeked out, but it wasn't too obvious. As for the wig, I grimaced, realizing there wouldn't be enough time to fix my hair if I tore it off. I decided to keep it on but push it back as best I could, letting it resemble perhaps a new style or something. My bare legs would be visible, though. That was trickier. The stockings and sandals would stand out. But Joel was still knocking, and the last thing I wanted was for him to keep pounding or involve the landlord, thinking I'd slipped in the shower and injured myself. I hurriedly slipped off the sandals and tossed them behind the bed, then yanked off the stockings, letting them crumple to the floor. My heart was racing, adrenaline spiking in my veins. In a moment of panic, I tried to decide how to explain the wig if he asked. Maybe I'd feign a Halloween party or a costume theme at the office, but it wasn't anywhere near Halloween. I hurried to the door, sweater falling to just below my hips. I opened it the smallest fraction, just enough to see Joel's face. His eyes flicked over me instantly. I could tell he was surprised. I spoke first, words tumbling out. "Joel, hey, sorry, I was in the middle of something. Everything all right?" He blinked, looking me up and down. Hey man, are you okay?" He coughed awkwardly. "You look different. I thought maybe you were sick or something." His gaze landed on the brown waves of the wig, then flicked down to the oversized sweater. I tried not to redden too obviously. Yeah, fine," I said, clearing my throat. "I was just relaxing, doing, a thing, just a personal thing." He nodded slowly, not quite sure how to handle the situation. "I sent you a few messages. You never replied, so I got worried. Your car was out front and you didn't pick up your phone." My phone was on silent in the bedroom, of course. "Sorry," I muttered. "I guess I just turned it off for a bit. Was focusing on something. Needed quiet." His eyebrows lifted, and a curious look passed over his face. "Sure, no problem," he managed. He tried to peer past me into the apartment. "You alone?" That question made my heart pound harder. "Yes, I'm alone. Just me in here." I forced a laugh that sounded a bit tight. "Look, it's not really a good time. I'm not dressed for company." I tugged the sweater more firmly around me, hoping he'd take the hint. He nodded again, slower this time. "All right. Right, yeah, sorry to drop by. I was just worried. No big deal." Then he hesitated, looking me up and down once more, his eyes flicking to the wig. I could tell he was trying to puzzle it out. "Thanks for checking on me. I appreciate it. Really." I moved to close the door. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Sure, yeah," he said with a faint exhale. "Have a good night, James." Or, "Yeah, just have a good night." He gave a small wave, then turned away with a bewildered expression. I shut the door quickly, locking it again. My forehead was damp with perspiration. My cheeks felt hot. That was too close for comfort. I slid down against the door, the sweater bunching around me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I couldn't recall the last time I'd felt that level of panic. After a few moments, the intense anxiety dissolved into uneasy laughter. I couldn't help it. The situation had been so absurd. Answering the door half-dressed as Jessica, trying to pass it off as normal. Eventually, I stood up, tiptoed back to the bedroom, and slipped off the sweater, letting it fall onto my bed. There in the mirror was the partial truth, the wig slightly askew from my scramble, the blue sundress half hidden beneath the thick sweater. I adjusted the wig, running my fingers through the curls, and tried to get my breathing back under control. The comedic side of it was that Joel had no idea what I was actually doing. He just thought it looked odd. Maybe I'd have to explain it to him one day, or maybe I wouldn't. But for now, I was thankful he didn't push harder. I went back to the kitchen, finished my pasta, though it was lukewarm by then, and returned to the bedroom where the music was still playing softly. The sense of peace I had earlier was slightly rattled by Joel's surprise visit, but I realized, with a surge of relief, that I wasn't feeling guilt. I was feeling tension, maybe a bit of embarrassment, but not shame. I was more worried about awkward questions from Joel than I was about the morality of what I was doing. My only concern was whether he'd gossip or misunderstand, but even that anxiety was overshadowed by the comfort I felt each time I looked at myself in the mirror. I smoothed my sundress, ignoring the anxious what-ifs swirling through my mind. Eventually, I decided it was best to store away Jessica's belongings for the night. My heart ached a little at the thought of letting go of that freedom, but I had an early morning meeting. If I stayed up too long, I'd regret it. So I began reversing the process. Off came the sandals, though I'd already tossed them aside earlier, and then the wig. I placed the wig on its stand in the box, gently brushing out any tangles. Next, the makeup wipes. I carefully removed the foundation, the lipstick, the light mascara I'd applied. I peeled off the stockings from earlier, folded the dress with care, and put everything back in its place. When I was done, I stared in the mirror at James again. My skin looked a bit flushed from the wipes, and my hair was slightly messy. The faint lines of stress had crept back into my forehead. I could see them. But a new sense of composure lingered behind my eyes. Even though I hadn't spent hours and hours as Jessica, the time I did spend offered a brief, blissful reprieve. I pulled on comfortable pajamas, turned off the music, and crawled into bed. The next morning, I awakened to my usual alarm. I went through the routine: shower, shave, coffee. I put on a crisp dress shirt and dark slacks for work, combed my hair neatly, and checked my emails. The city was starting to hum outside, sirens and car horns blending into a cacophony I'd grown used to. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk, James was firmly back in place, the efficient marketing professional ready to handle the day's challenges. But I felt a subtle calm inside, thanks to Jessica's presence the night before. At work, Lucas gave me a nod as I entered the office. He held up a folder. "Morning, James. Ready for the real estate pitch meeting? It got moved up an hour, so we need to be prepared sooner." I swallowed, feeling a jolt of stress I couldn't entirely mask. "Sure thing. I'll look over the slides one more time and refine the talking points." That's what I like to hear. Shannon is printing out the handouts, but if you want to give them a final glance, she's in the copy room. "Thanks, boss," I said, forcing a professional smile. I headed down the hallway, exchanging quick pleasantries with coworkers as we passed. I saw Shannon hunched over the copier, feeding in the final pages. "There you are," she said, relief in her voice. "I was worried you'd be stuck in traffic, and I didn't want to handle this pitch on my own." "Nah, I'm here," I replied, rifling through the handouts. "Thanks for printing these." Shannon nodded. She was a couple of years older than me, with a quick wit and a knack for reading people. As I flipped through the pages, I caught her glancing at me. "Everything okay? You look a little tired." "Long night," I offered, closing the folder. "But I'm good." "All right," she said, not pressing further. "Let's nail this meeting." We headed off to the conference room. greeting the small team of potential clients who wanted a fresh angle for their property listings. The conversation felt lively at first, but as the meeting wore on, the clients started nitpicking at details. Their marketing director questioned everything: the color scheme, the social media strategy, the budget. Shannon and I scrambled to defend our proposals, and by the end, I felt drained. When the clients finally left, we both sank into the chairs, exchanging a glance of weary camaraderie. "Wow," she sighed. "That was intense." I rubbed my temples. "Yep, but at least we didn't lose them entirely. They just want more data, more analytics." Lucas popped his head in. "Great job holding your own, both of you. We'll regroup tomorrow to finalize some new angles, okay?" He gave us a thumbs up, then disappeared down the hallway. We were left alone in the conference room. Shannon sat with her arms crossed on the table, looking me over. "I swear, I need a spa day or something. My shoulders are killing me." I managed a tight laugh. "I know the feeling. You ever do anything to just, blow off steam?" she asked suddenly. It was a casual question, but it struck me. "I mean, do you go for runs, or read, or binge TV? I'm looking for tips because I've tried everything, and the stress is insane." I hesitated, remembering last night's moment as Jessica. Obviously, I wasn't about to share that here at work. So I said, "I read sometimes. I like to, play some music." That was partly true. I listened to plenty of songs in my bedroom. "I guess we all have our hobbies." She nodded. "Right. I might sign up for a yoga class." A wave of relief passed through me that she didn't probe further. After a few more minutes of chat, we parted ways. I returned to my desk and immersed myself in emails. Work stretched on, a barrage of tasks that had me pinned down until late afternoon. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I left my cubicle and headed for the coffee station, noticing I had a missed call from Joel. My pulse flickered. I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to have that conversation yet. Still, I dialed him back, stepping into a quieter corner of the hallway. "Yo," Joel answered almost immediately. "You good?" "Yeah, man. Sorry about last night," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm. I had my phone on silent and was in the middle of a private moment. "No problem," Joel replied, but I sensed curiosity humming below his casual tone. "I just wanted to be sure you weren't, in trouble or something." "I appreciate that," I said, forcing a light chuckle. "I was fine. Really, just kind of needed some alone time." A pause. "Okay. Well, we should hang out soon. There's that new pub that opened near the stadium. Maybe next week?" "Sure, let's do that," I said, nodding even though he couldn't see me. "Cool. Catch you later." He hung up, leaving me to wonder what exactly was turning over in his mind. Would he let it go, or was he trying to figure out what I was up to last night? There was no immediate way to tell, so I slid the phone into my pocket and grabbed a coffee before returning to my desk. That evening, after dinner, I debated pulling out the sundress again, but my nerves were still a bit shaky after Joel's surprise visit. I compromised by playing Jessica's music softly in the bedroom, letting those familiar pop tunes wash over me while I read a few chapters of a crime novel. I found comfort in that, even though I didn't fully change into Jessica. The presence of that music alone made me feel a slice of that calm. Over the next few days, life continued. The demands of work piled up, and I found myself spending entire evenings at the office. I hardly had time to breathe, let alone slip into Jessica's clothes. It was a stressful stretch, one that had me lying awake at night, thinking about sales targets and client demands. Sometimes, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a faint longing to put on that sky blue dress again and just block out the noise. I finally got a chance the following weekend. Saturday morning, I woke up early, mind brimming with tasks to do: grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning my apartment. But I paused halfway through the day, letting the vacuum cleaner rest in a corner, and realized I needed that precious time as Jessica. The tension in my neck had returned, and I knew only one real way to let it dissolve. So I closed the blinds in my bedroom, turned on the music, and carefully went through the boxes beneath my bed. This time, I chose a soft pink blouse and a charcoal skirt that reached my knees. I paired it with black flats, simple and comfortable. I did my makeup with more care than usual, adding a subtle winged eyeliner just because I felt like experimenting. Then I pulled the wig on and gave a slow twirl, checking myself in the mirror. A small thrill went through me. I felt my chest loosen, as though I'd been wearing a too-tight vest all week, and now I was free again. Halfway through my personal fashion session, my phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but I saw from the caller ID it was my sister Melanie. She was older than me by a few years, lived in another state, and we rarely saw each other except during holidays. I'd never told her about Jessica, though a small part of me suspected she might be more understanding than most. She'd always been supportive of me in her own direct way. Debating for a moment, I answered the call. "Hey, Mel," I said, realizing my voice might sound slightly softer than usual, but it probably wasn't enough to matter. "James? Hey," she replied. "How's it going?" "Not bad. Just cleaning up around the place." I lied, kind of. I was technically in the middle of chores before deciding to dress up. "Sounds fun," she teased. "I'm calling because Mom and Dad want to know if you're coming for Thanksgiving. We're trying to coordinate flights." "Ah," I said, leaning against the dresser. In the mirror, I watched my reflection, wig and makeup in place, a phone pressed to my ear. "I'm not sure. Work is nuts, and we have a new client on the horizon, so—" "You should take a break," Melanie cut in. "You always say you're stressed, James. Can't you just talk to your boss and get some time off?" I opened my mouth to reply, but the words caught. If only she knew. "I'll figure something out," I said eventually. "I do need a break, that's for sure." "Good," she chirped. "I can't wait to see you. Maybe we can all do something fun together, and you can meet my new boyfriend. Well, he's not that new, but you haven't met him yet." I agreed politely, letting her talk about her plans. It was comforting, in a way, to hear my sister's voice ramble on about day-to-day details. Meanwhile, I perched on the bed in a skirt, legs crossed, glancing occasionally at my reflection. The disconnect was amusing. The conversation was so ordinary, yet I was wearing something that, years ago, I never would have pictured myself in, at least not openly. We wrapped up the call, and I placed my phone aside. I ran my hands over the fabric of the skirt, letting the music fill the room again. It was a mid-tempo pop song, one that always made me imagine dancing in a field of wildflowers, silly as that might sound. I stood, moved around the room, swaying to the beat. As Jessica, letting my body follow the melody felt natural. I could almost envision a new world behind my closed eyes, one without the constraints and hustle that defined my weekdays. Time passed like that, peacefully, without guilt. I lost myself in the gentle swirl of the skirt, the tapping of my flats against the floor. Eventually, I settled at my desk in the corner of the bedroom. It was a place usually reserved for late-night spreadsheet editing, but now I decided to indulge in a bit of creativity. I had a notebook in which I sometimes jotted down random ideas, fragmented story ideas or lines of poetry that sprang to mind. James rarely let himself linger on such whimsical pursuits, but Jessica found them appealing. I flipped open the notebook. Staring at the blank page, I tried to express the calm swirling inside me. I wrote down a few lines about a breeze blowing across a quiet lake at dusk, about the simple joy of hearing your own footsteps on a forest path. The words came easily in this state, lacking any pretense of guilt. To me, it was just another moment of letting my mind drift in a direction that normally got suppressed by busy city life. Eventually, the day began to fade. The sunlight streaming through the blinds softened. The corners of the room turned a little golden, and I realized the afternoon had slipped away, replaced by early evening. My phone vibrated, and I saw a text from Shannon reminding me about some documents for Monday. With a resigned sigh, I set my pen aside and began the gentle process of removing the outfit and makeup. I held the pink blouse in my hands for a moment, feeling its texture. A small longing tugged at me, but like always, I folded everything neatly, returning each piece to its proper box. Off went the wig, onto its stand. Off went the eyeliner, blush, and lipstick, each wiped away carefully so no residue would remain. My reflection in the mirror blurred as I moved about, layering on the edges of James's daily reality. Eventually, I stood in t-shirt and sweatpants, the more standard uniform for a quiet evening. The music played on, but I turned it down before slipping out to the living room. That night, I had an almost uninterrupted sleep, waking up Sunday morning with a sense of calm. My thoughts drifted to Monday's tasks, but they didn't loom over me quite as ominously. I wasn't the only one noticing the difference either. When I came into the office on Monday, Shannon gave me a curious once-over. "You seem less tense," she commented, sipping her coffee. "Enjoy your weekend?" A small smile tugged at my lips. "Yeah, I guess you could say that. I got some quality downtime." "Glad to hear it," she replied, returning to her desk. "We're all going to need that Zen energy with the week we've got ahead." Days turned to weeks, and I found a comfortable pattern. Maybe once or twice a week, whenever I felt the weight of deadlines piling too high, I'd devote a small window of time to Jessica. The routine never got old. The swirling thrill of wearing a sundress or a skirt, the softness of a wig brushing my shoulders, the quiet hush of responsibilities slipping away. It felt as rejuvenating as a good night's rest or a deep conversation with a friend. Each time, I recognized that same sense of gentle liberation. Occasionally, I'd remember Joel's confused face at the door. We never explicitly spoke about it. When we did hang out at that new pub, he avoided asking about it, and I didn't volunteer any explanation. Maybe he chalked it up to an odd quirk. Maybe one day I'd tell him the truth. For now, I didn't feel any compulsion to do so. This was mine, a space I cherished. A few months later, I found myself in the midst of one of the busiest seasons at the agency. We had multiple major campaigns running simultaneously, and each one demanded a piece of my attention. My phone was constantly buzzing, my laptop churning out project updates. The entire team was exhausted. We were pulling late nights, fueled by coffee and deadline panic. Through it all, I kept thinking, I can't wait for the moment I can shut the door to my apartment, open those boxes, and find Jessica again. One evening, I finally got that chance. It was a Friday, the end of a grueling week. I stumbled home around 8, tossed my briefcase onto the couch, and peeled off my tie. Without hesitating, I headed to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. The lamp glowed softly, reflecting off the mirror in a familiar welcome. I set my phone to silent right away. Then came the comforting rummage through boxes and the swirl of excitement in my stomach. This time, I chose a simple navy blue dress with short sleeves and a subtle floral pattern along the hem. It always made me feel somewhat elegant without being fussy. I paired it with black flats, stepping carefully into each shoe. Looking at my reflection, I let out a slow breath. A small, involuntary smile spread across my face, one that crinkled the corners of my eyes. My shoulders dropped an inch or two, releasing the tension that had built up over the endless conference calls and anxious emails. I turned on my speaker, letting a soothing playlist float through the bedroom. Then, with measured care, I applied my makeup, just enough foundation to even my complexion, a bit of mascara to open up my eyes, and a soft pink lip color that made me feel youthful in a way. The wig I chose was the same brown waves, though I'd trimmed them a bit recently to keep it neat. Once it was on, I let my fingers lightly comb through the strands. The reflection staring back at me looked bright, alive, and content. I said her name softly, Jessica, and gave my reflection a small nod as if greeting an old friend. The relief washed over me like a wave. The incessant chatter of pending projects and upcoming deadlines faded into the background. For a few hours I wanted to exist in this bubble of calm. I swayed gently to the music, indulging in the quiet presence of that internal shift. My posture relaxed, and even my thoughts slowed to a more peaceful rhythm. In that warm lamplight, in the cozy confines of my bedroom, I didn't miss James's obligations. I didn't feel 1 ounce of remorse for stepping away from them. Despite the unexpected knocks at my door, the busy calls, the coworker speculation, none of that chipped away at how right this felt. I didn't crave living as Jessica permanently. I liked my life as James, my job, and the daily routines. But in these moments, I was free from the expectations I usually lugged around like weighted luggage. Jessica represented a pocket of serenity in an otherwise chaotic world. I found my gaze drifting to the closed bedroom window. For a fleeting moment, I wondered what it might be like to step outside dressed this way, to walk down the street as Jessica, to feel the breeze on my arms and the city lights washing over me. But that step was one I hadn't brought myself to take. Maybe it was caution, or maybe it was a desire to keep this refuge wholly mine. Going out publicly felt like it would complicate the simplicity I treasured here. So I left the blinds shut and stayed safe within my walls. Eventually, I settled onto the bed, pillows propped behind me, and stared at the ceiling. The music lulled me, the dress soft against my skin. Time drifted by in an almost dreamlike haze. I felt the stress of the week dissipate like smoke, replaced by the gentle hum of a more present, grounded feeling. My eyelids grew heavy, and I considered just drifting to sleep right there as Jessica, letting the next day come at its own pace. But I'd never done that, never gone to bed fully dressed as Jessica. Not for any moral reason, purely practical. The wig would tangle, the makeup would smear, and the dress would wrinkle. So, with a reluctant sigh, I rose and began the methodical ritual of putting everything away. First the wig, then the makeup, carefully wiped from my face. Finally, I slipped off the navy blue dress and hung it neatly, giving it a gentle brush with my hand to smooth any wrinkles. It felt like I was tucking away a secret, a cherished moment in time. Standing in front of the mirror as James again, my t-shirt and shorts in place, I noticed how calm my eyes looked, no longer overshadowed by the pressure of the day. Maybe tomorrow would bring more demands, more last-minute client crises. Maybe Joel would decide to ask the burning question about that night I answered the door in a sweater and wig. Maybe one day I'd gather my family for a conversation about who Jessica was and why she mattered to me. But for now, my reflection carried a sense of quiet confidence, and most of all, no guilt. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chest, and let out a slow breath. The city outside buzzed on, lights winking in tall windows across the skyline. My phone, still on silent, lay face down on the nightstand. In the hush of that room, I felt a gentle contentment. There was no shame in enjoying that part of me, no remorse for finding peace. Some people might call it a guilty pleasure, but I saw no reason to carry guilt at all. Crossdressing for me wasn't a moral dilemma. It was just another dimension of who I was, one that gave me relief from the burdens that came with my name, my job, my day-to-day persona. I knew that in the morning, I'd wake up as James, scroll through emails, check the day's schedule, and shuffle into the office. And that was fine. I liked James, but tonight I'd enjoyed the respite of being Jessica, and the only pang in my chest was knowing I couldn't linger in that comfort forever. That twinge wasn't shame. It was more like a longing to keep that freedom alive whenever I wanted. No matter what anyone might think, I knew my truth in that moment. Behind my locked bedroom door, pulling out those boxes, letting Jessica's clothes slide over my skin, and hearing the music that made me dance, I felt no guilt, only peace.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.